And last but not least, we have Nettie Lagace, who's the Associate Director for Programmes at NISO, where she's responsible for facilitating the work of NISO's committees and development groups for standards and best practices, and works with the community to encourage broad adoption of the consensus work. Nettie's going to talk about the work that NISO undertakes in its unique environment and pulling standards together. Specifically look at some recent NISO efforts and the issues in standards development and awareness. Thanks, Nettie.
Thank you, Laura. Very excited to be here today, and thanks for having me. I see I advance with this. Good. So I want to tell you a little bit about NISO, although I do see many of our NISO community members in the audience, so some of this will be familiar, but I want to introduce my organization a little bit. We are a member-based organization, and that's primarily how we derive our revenue. We also have a fairly robust education program with many webinars that are put on throughout the year involving community members, and several virtual conferences and a few in-person events. Our members are three primary constituents. We have libraries, library organizations. We also have publishers and publishing organizations, suppliers to publishers, and then system providers to both libraries and publishing organizations. These are roughly split along an axis of three, although it's not exactly equal at any given time. We also tie in to the American National Standards Institute, that's ANSI. That's the body that accredits us and makes our standards official in terms of the process. And we also represent the United States in certain ISO standards, so we have an international presence there. Our name is the National Information Standards Organization, but we do have a fair number of members who are international in nature, and I think with information and documentation, our general area of work, it's impossible to be strictly in one country, and I think our name is a little bit of an anachronism. We are thinking about moving to just being NISO, but there's other considerations about that. I also want to say that we have a really pretty good communication mechanisms with other standards or development organizations. That's my other link out there. So standards development organizations and standards, those who manage standards, so Crossref, Ringgold, ORCID, Editeur, others who are working in this area. And that's part of our philosophy that, of course, you can't be working in a vacuum. You have to be communicating with others in the space. So standards, what good are they? Well, it's a little bit, I don't want to repeat the things that we've heard from the other presenters, but it is the thing that's not very exciting. It should be kept under the hood. The idea of a light bulb. You don't want to think about how the electricity is flowing through the system. You just want to plug in your light to the plug in the wall, depending on what country you're in, if your plug's going to work. And you want the light to turn on without electrocuting you in the process. But all of that is happening and taking place via standards. And the same thing for information sharing in our realm as well. Some benefits are we ensure that things are done the same way. This helps those who are getting started in a particular area get going without too much research, reinventing the wheel kind of thing. It helps consumers understand what kinds of things that they're receiving. So it can help, for example, if you refer to a standard in an RFP process, this levels the playing field for those who are responding to the process, and as a customer, you can better understand what it is you're actually getting in your world. and it helps make sure that things are working together. I have a very good librarian friend. She's a metadata librarian that works for one of the biggest research libraries in the Boston area. And she's very skilled in her work. We don't usually talk about the things we do in our jobs. We go out and have drinks and have fun. But we were talking about the work that we do, and she said, well, I really, in my organization, we do a lot of things our way. We describe our objects our own way. We create our own mechanisms for doing things because we have very specific reasons and very specific purposes for how we want to use our data and find it. And then she said, well, it does come to become a problem, though, when we want to connect with people and institutions outside our realm. Our data doesn't really talk to others' data so well, and we can't really use that data in our own system without a lot of retrofitting. And she said that, completely unprompted by me, that it's nice to have your own way of doing things until you want to work with other people, and then it becomes a problem. So just another plug for standards, as if we needed some more in this session. NISO, where do things come from and what's the NISO process? I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is where in other presentations when I talk about the NISO process, people's eyes really glaze over. But think about it as knitting. When you're pulling together different threads, different colors, and putting them together in a way that's organized and hopefully functional. That's what we're doing with standards as well. Our ideas come from a multiple of places. At NISO, we're always trying to think of new ideas, and they don't even have to be necessarily related to things that we've done before. One of the interesting things about my job is that the things that NISO manages are so incredibly diverse, and we're always looking for new problems to solve. We have working groups. The working groups get together and start discussing what they're going to deliver. They gather input from the field, produce a draft output that people in the field then can review and comment on. Comments are responded to, and the group then decides what they're going to change in the document, what they're not going to change. And they publish the document. And this can be either a recommended practice, which we've referred to earlier. Both KBART and the ALI documents are recommended practices. They're not full standards going through the ANSI process, but we follow the same general theme. But they're meant to be more lightweight, meant to be easier to adopt in a faster changing marketplace, and also really important, meant to be easier to modify in the future when requirements change. The last part is also very important. All of the things we do need a very strong marketing and education component. So for all of our documents, we try to create what we call standing committees. And these are groups of people in the community who are stakeholders in the work, who know the people who are using it and can answer questions, can go to conferences and talk about the work in very specific contexts, and also understand when something about the work needs to be changed or updated, and then provide input to the NISO process to help with that. And then, when something needs to be updated, attend to that process. So specifically, sort of repeating what I just had in my last slide. These standing committees, most of the things that we publish, when you think of KBART, you wouldn't, the way that I sort of police the effort, I don't call it the KBART working group. In this case, it's the KBART standing committee, and they're they come into the play post-publication. But as part of the NISO community, we really rely on these standing committees. The NISO staff itself is very small. There's only 4 of us at the NISO staff. I manage the working groups. Todd Carpenter, my boss, the executive director, goes out and about and talks to as many people in the field. And we have an educational director who manages our web programs and a member services coordinator, and that's it. But NISO itself is really people in the community. So all of you who are participating in NISO work, NISO isn't me, it's actually you. And that's a part of my job that I take very seriously, and it's one of the things that I couldn't do my work if there weren't people in the community who were helping with all of these things, because the NISO staff couldn't possibly manage these necessary activities for all of the things that we publish as a body. So what are some of the challenges? Standards are not exciting, but they really are necessary. But there are some things, since I've come into my job at NISO, that I guess, learned by doing. I've been at NISO for 4 years, and there are many different working groups and standing committees that have gone through our processes that meet on twice a month. I tune into the calls, and I pay attention to all the calls as much as I can to learn about what they're doing. Even though I myself am not a subject expert, I try to, my job is to help the process move things along as necessary, and there's different things that I've observed. And I also participated in NISO work in my previous job at a library software company. I was the NISO rep, so I sat on these working groups from that perspective too. Some of the challenges that we experience in the process of creating standards are just even in the participation. When we put together a working group, it's important to be able to find just the right people to be participating on that group. It's good if you have people who work at a technical level, who understand the guts of what you're trying to do, so that you can create recommendations that actually can be taken up as quickly as possible. However, it's also important to have people participating perhaps more from a strategic perspective from a company, so that they have the pull in order to adopt the thing that comes out of the working group. Similarly, sometimes participation can be because a company really believes in a standard and the value of a standard. Sometimes participation is because, oh, my competitors on the working group, I need to be able to be at the table. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It just is a different perspective, and sometimes winds up shaping the discussion in certain ways. Something that comes up again and again, and I think is always going to be an issue in standards development, is the scope. All of NISO's projects are scoped to be completed in approximately 18 months. Most of the time, our projects run a little bit longer than that, mainly because we are a volunteer organization and people have day jobs and other priorities. But the scope is always an issue. There are always things at the beginning of the project that the group discusses and says, okay, we can complete these things in 18 months, but we have to leave these things out. We can't get this done. And it's always the case that what is left out is ultimately disappointing to some other stakeholder in the group. They always wish that more could be put in. Typically we say, all right, we'll address that in a phase 2, but things get pushed down the road. But it's always one of those things that just comes into the picture. Another thing that's very interesting to me on these calls, I'm starting to think I need to make a bet on when any working group is going to have this discussion about, are we creating something that is going to be the ideal practice for people in this field, or are we going to be practical and admit that if we have something ideal, there are going to be many institutions that won't ever adopt it for one reason or another. Therefore, we are going to describe something that's more akin to a lowest common denominator. And Stephen mentioned that. But the group discusses things, and then after several months, they always have this sort of heart-to-heart discussion about what is it that we're really creating here, and they move forward. Of course, we want our works to be the ideal, but then again, we also want the work to be adopted. So I think there's something in the middle, and there's considerations that have to be made there. And then the other part that's just a fact of life in standards, and this is probably one of the reasons why that standards are not so exciting, is they can be pretty sloggy. You are working at a very low level in a lot of these discussions. The documentation preparation itself can be very, very boring, mind-numbing sometimes, just putting the thoughts on paper and making sure that they're clear. We have editors that help with that, but after the public review period, when people ask questions and make points and say, oh, you left something out, what did you consider this? All of those comments need to be addressed and managed, and that can be pretty fearsome. So those are just some of the challenges, and I hope that we have some ideas as a panel for we won't be able to solve all of these, but maybe there's ways to make them a little bit easier to bear. So I want to just talk in some very lower level terms, and I'll fly through these projects, but really any of you can ask questions about them, and I'm here today and tomorrow, of course, so if you've got questions about any of these projects, let me know. So I just wanted to talk about 3 areas of work. NISO has 3 leadership committees. These consist of leaders in particular areas, and these topic committee members help us determine what we are going to be working on and help determine the direction of particular projects. So we have 3 topic committees. These are the Content and Collections Management Topic Committee, the Business Information Topic Committee, and the Discovery to Delivery Topic Committee, and they manage the projects in each of these respective areas. And the 3 projects I'll be talking about are JATS and the Standard Tag Set, which is a new project, the Altmetrics Initiative, and Access and License Indicators. In all of these works, we went about the formation in slightly different ways. JATS is actually you could say, somewhat of a de facto standard when it came to NISO. It was already had a previous life as the NLM D2D and was in use in many different organizations. It came to NISO just before I joined NISO in 2011. I think it came to NISO in 2010 for a full ANSI standardization process. And this was intended to help codify JATS to be able to be used by publishers beyond the initial small set of biomedical publishers in order to be adopted in more broad areas, and then also be able to make sure that these other users were going to be able to put in their requirements to JATS and make it a formal, more robust kind of document. So it was published as a ANSI NISO standard in 2012 and is now managed under a continuous maintenance process. This means through ANSI guidelines, we can make changes more quickly than we could under our regular ANSI process. And that's more housekeeping stuff, but the idea is that we are able to update JATS hopefully fairly quickly. JATS is undergoing a revision now, and I expect that JATS 1.1 will be published sometime this fall, formally published, and that will include support for the access and license indicators that I'll be coming to a few slides from now. We have a new project that's sort of a child of JATS. This is called the STS, or the Standard Tag Set project. It's for standards publishing. So if any of you in the audience are standards publishers of standards, this might be something you're interested in. This is a derivative of JATS, which is in use at ISO, and other standards development organizations wish to use it, but they also wish to be sure that their requirements are able to be addressed. So we're starting up a new project to make sure that all of these things can be put into STS, and that STS can be formally tied to JATS. So what goes into JATS will go into STS and vice versa. We are forming a working group now. The Altmetrics Initiative is something also that was referred to earlier. This is sort of we're taking a phased approach, and this project actually started a few years ago in 2013. Where the altmetrics community was having meetings talking about altmetrics, new things in altmetrics, and there became a thread of discussion about standards. Would standards be useful in the altmetrics area? The general concept was yes, but the community didn't really have a firm idea of what kinds of standards would be most useful. So in this case, NISO obtained a grant from the Sloan Foundation to undergo a study of the altmetrics area for standardization. And a lot of the discussion at the time was, well, altmetrics is really an emerging area. Wouldn't it be detrimental to be imposing standards on all of this innovation? The idea was not to impose authority, but rather to help the innovation, where we could standardize communications in particular areas that would also help altmetrics become more of a adopted solution. So the phased approach was where we held meetings of stakeholders. They talked about the kinds of things that would be useful, several meetings over many months. We created a white paper distilling all of the discussions and then trying to decide what are the things that are most important to standardize. We put out a survey, held more discussions, and then determined working groups, which are now underway at NISO, which are covering 3 areas. Fairly basic areas, I hope. What are definitions and descriptions that can be used in altmetrics? What are appropriate metrics that are things that are not articles? Can we develop metrics for data sets or for performances or for software? How can these scholarly outputs be measured appropriately? How can persistent identifiers be used in altmetrics? Leighton had a very persuasive case for the use of identifiers, and of course, really it's key in an electronic environment. And then also development of strategies to improve data quality through source data providers. There's a steering committee. We have 3 working groups, so they all need to communicate and not duplicate each other's work. I will skip this slide, but in the interest of time. And then the last project is the access license and indicators referred to by Laird. This was published earlier this year, and it's really simple, creating 2 tags to help identify what materials are available. The group started using the term open access and early on decided that open access meant too many things to too many different people, wanted to be as practical as possible, changed the term that's used in the recommended practice to be free to read. Can I get to it and can I read it? Not can I use it in a course material, not can I download it, simply can I read it? And we also determined that there should be license information communicated, but not necessarily it communicated electronically explicitly. The license can be communicated through a URI linking to another document or perhaps a set of electronic information about the license. What's the reuse, either human or machine readable? And I think right now everything is still pretty much human readable only. The idea is that this metadata would be created by the content creators, publishers. As Laird mentioned, there are some hurdles to doing that. And I should also say that, and I think it did mention, that the ALI tags are now included in JATS, in the JATS 1.1 version, which will be official at the end of this year. So just to close, we do a lot of stuff, and it's really due to the community, but we try to write about it as much as possible. We have a quarterly publication and a monthly publication, and you can sign up for these and talk to me about it anytime. And just to remind you, and sort of also reiterating what the other speakers have said, the standards are intended to do the heavy lifting, and you can run far if you've got a standard under your chin. Thank you.